The Lucky Breaker was a rough scrap of metal. It responded to every course correction with pops and groans. An array of coolant pipes and ducting ran throughout the ship in every available space. The systems were rigged together with tape and quick fixes. Every component was under the care of the sole crew member on board. Liam's knees pressed tightly against the panels in front of him, and his helmet wedged at his hip. Surrounded by banks of dials and switches, all patched with loose and exposed wiring. He planted himself between the seat and the displays so he wouldn't drift off into his bedroom. Looking out a viewport, he could see thousands of bright red asteroids loop for what seemed like forever into the horizon of the pale planet below. They moved in large, lazy arcs. Each piece bent the light of the oceans into a splintered display dancing on the hull. The big miners called him reckless for working solo, let alone in a rig like this. Their company ships were fat and piloted by AI, and the workers never heard the pipes hissing in pain. They would certainly throw a fit if they ever saw his ship's logs, flickering thermal sensors, patched reactor, and the half-working cooling systems. The only regulated part of the Lucky Breaker was the comm array and the 2 channels that chirped to depot twice a day. Liam preferred the silence. It let him read the field's shifting moods. He adapted to the sometimes grazing rocks or matched them with what he called the traffic flow. 15 days into the 32-day contract, the ore yield barely reached a quarter ton. The numbers stared at him as if mocking the haul. Nothing but low-grade, almost worthless rubble. He gripped the yoke with an angered grasp. Just one more boulder, he told himself. Then maybe the limp home would be worth it. He marked his target, not a large rock, but with the density and thermal readings, it might be worth something. It was a large fragment, spinning in a slow, manageable spiral. As it came into his camera feed, the readouts blinked proximity warnings in faded orange, and he adjusted his course. Firing the retros, he lined up the docking claws with practiced movements. "Come on," he whispered, coaxing the boulder in with careful taps of the ram head. Nothing more than welded layers of scrap metal, but it was effective nonetheless. Then, with a jolt, the ship jarred as the arms clamped down, drawing the asteroid home. He released the coolant valves and articulated the control arms to push the drill heads forward. Switching on the drill rotation, the Lucky Breaker shook violently. Layers of rock broke off and turned to liquid due to the heat and pressure. Out of the viewport, the red metal drifted like blood, congealing and bubbling into the open space, cooling into molten shapes of crimson rock. His attention was on the yield meter, and when it bumped, he let out a slow breath and relaxed his shoulders. Then red lights flashed into life, and the panels at his knees read, "Drill feed slow." The extractor's torque jumped once, then again. He operated the extractor arms controls, first gently, then insistently, but the resistance grew. The arm began to groan in protest. And then it was stuck. He knew that if it was left like this, the pressure might burn out the drive motors, or worse, shatter the rock. Either way, he would lose his only chance for credits. He went through the steps on instinct, toggling the manual override, checking the displays, and reaching for the battered toolkit floating at his feet. No time for delay. He put on his helmet and squeezed through the narrow airlock. The suit was too bulky for such a tight space, and his patches became stiff at the edges as the pressure increased. Fortunately, it was enough to keep the vacuum out and the much-needed air in. Liam pressed into the lock, listening to his heart while the pressure cycled. He emerged into the asteroid field. The Lucky Breaker hovered in silence, and the red rock was tightly clamped beneath it. The extractor arm was indeed stuck, frozen in the rock. He attached the safety tether to his waist and, with a lurch, hurled himself toward the arm. He started to tumble as he left the ship, so he threw a scrap piece of metal from his dump pouch in the opposite direction to counteract the rotation. As Liam got closer to the asteroid, he had to jump from chunk to chunk, avoiding pools of still molten rock. The thick, blood-like magma completely enveloped the drill, and the head was nearly fused to the boulder. He wedged his arm into the maintenance port and attempted to release the emergency lever. The liquid began to reach the edge of the port and was making his arm uncomfortably hot. He tried again, with a lot more pressure this time. Something released, and the arm snapped back, nearly sending him into space. But the clamps held. Now, though, a new sensation rose up from his feet into his chest. A vibration that pulsed, unlike any mechanical vibration or shake he had ever felt before. Liam froze, dazed in thought. He wondered if maybe he had injured himself. Perhaps the red-hot blood burst his suit, but all indications suggested that he was physically fine. He looked for the lucky breaker. It was still there. As he turned around, he saw the surrounding asteroids disperse in unnatural directions, all leaving their positions. There was a large burst. Not a collision nor a fragment strike, but a force, broad and silent, that pushed him hard up the side of the ship into the dish antenna, sending loud and screeching reverberations into his earpiece. As he winced, he saw the warnings flood across his HUD. Before he had time to assess the damage, the tether pulled tight to his waist and yanked him around, wrapping around the hull. He slammed back into the ship, and his visor cracked. A stream of red, white, and blue swirled in his vision as he spun, seeing blurs of the asteroids and the planet. Weirdly, he noticed that some of the molten rock was spinning with him, staying in his view and not drifting away. Then it pooled and splashed into his visor. "Oh, great. Just what I needed," he said, realizing it was his blood. He reached for more scraps in his pouch and canceled his spin. He stopped, facing directly at the ship attached to the rock. In the newly found fractures, he saw what looked like green and gold light flickering in and out of view behind the globular stones, which had cooled after being molten magma. Still in shock, he didn't really understand what he was looking at and decided it would be better to get to the ship first. He dragged himself along the tether back to the airlock. His arms were tight and sore. Pulling himself in, breathing heavily, he looked back out the hatch to see the boulder. The pulsing and flickering were now moving much faster. Its cast shadows began to, what seemed like, attach to the clamps, almost crawling up the side of the extractor arm. A stutter of alarms blared from his helmet. His suit pressure was dropping, and an oxygen warning came up. He forced himself back to focus and scraped across the inside rooms. "Just my luck. I find one good asteroid and it's got some freaky shadow monster in it," he said. He moved to the workstation and grabbed the cutting torch, then a few patch seals for the suit. Pressing the patches onto the holes and covering the crack in his visor with a thick, clear putty until the pressure and oxygen warnings disappeared. When he finished, he moved to the airlock once more. "You're coming off one way or another," he said to the clamps as he flew down to them. He attempted to release them with the eject bolts. All they gave were wimpy puffs. "That's what I get for cheaping out on the safety release," he said. Then, pulling out the cutting torch, he began to cut away at the clamp joints. "Carlac, these were so expensive," he said. As he cut, the shadows quickened, moving up the clamp arm and stopped short of the torch's flame. Odd, he thought. It stayed put and then moved back and forth along the cut, as if examining it. When it cut free, he moved to the next arm. This time, the shadows didn't just stay at a distance, but moved right into the torch. They recoiled, and the lights in the fractured rock intensified enough to nearly blind him. He kept cutting. He wanted to leave as fast as possible. After it cut free, he moved to the final arm, and when he placed the torch on the surface, the shadow jumped and doused the flame. It shut right off. He turned it back on, made an inch of progress, and they did it again. "Cut it out," he said. The shadows retreated, and the lights stopped moving almost entirely. He found himself looking at the shapes inside the asteroid. They were liquid and shifting, and a bright core was now visible, spinning at an insurmountable speed. "Screw it, I'll just bust it," he said. He pulled against the tether and pressed back to the hull. As he reached the airlock, the lucky breaker groaned and seemed like the decades of patchwork would give in at that moment. The whole ship shivered, but from the inside this time. It looked like the frame was stretching from the inside and about to burst through the thin shell. The control arrays popped off and flew out in all directions, sparks flashing at all the connection points. Red lights were mapped along a fracture that was growing along the belly of the ship. His tether stretched, and he saw it was about to pull him back around the ship, so with all of his strength, he dove for the lock. As he slammed into the switch, the airlock shut, pinching the cable, but the line began to feed out. He was being dragged back to the door. He reached for anything to hold onto, but everything snapped as he was pulled. He braced his legs against the doors, trying to win the tug of war, but whatever was pulling the cable was absurdly strong. It was now too tight to disconnect from the belt. His knees buckled, slamming into the steel. Then it forced his waist to the door's gap. He was fully pressed against the door and starting to be squeezed. Unable to see anything except a small section of the viewport, he fumbled for the torch. With luck, it was still attached to his utility line. Activating it, he cut in multiple spots, searching for the tether's connector. Finally, when he cut it, the line snapped free and was sucked out of the lock. He allowed only one deep breath, and his visor and face pressed against the window. It was so quiet and peaceful out there. The fields were uniform, and the planet was still a calming blue. Pulling his helmet off, he skipped along the corridor and wedged himself back between the seat and the panels. All of the gauges spun wildly, and the coolant temperatures jumped and dipped without any reason. Power was flickering in and out. He went to radio the depot station, but remembered his head smacking straight into the dish. "What do I do?" he said. He turned on the camera feed to look at the asteroid again. The light inside now poured out like honey onto the ship in splayed lines, undulating in impossible patterns. His head was throbbing. He kept dazing off. And focus was a long-lost friend. "I need to get this ship secure," he said to himself. Liam turned his attention to flipping switches, engaging the battery reserves, and checking the reactor feed. It was all over the place. The hull temperature continued to rise uncomfortably. EM readings were literally off the charts. They were pressed as close to the edge of the screen as possible. Something was draining the ship's power. Outside the viewport, a faint green mist curled along the edges, and in his ear he only heard a loud and persistent hiss. He watched as the glowing mist poured along the metal frame, pooling and rippling. A loud thump from below sent him sprawling. He grabbed onto the seat to keep himself from hitting a wall. His mining basket broke loose and tumbled away from the ship. On the camera, he saw what looked like a gold and green tendril pressing against the hatch, tracing along the linkages. The monitors all flashed, and the tendril split into thin filaments. They moved with intelligence, observing everything it touched. He jumped for the interior hatch control and closed it. Then, back at the panel, he blew out the de-icing jets along the extractor arm to try to break the clamp. As the jet's fuel depleted, the filaments stopped, pulsed, and then grew larger. The monitors flashed again, but then settled on a screen displaying multiple colors in a strange arrangement. Then everything stopped. Everything was calm. No alarms, no red lights, and no ship groans. The field beyond the ship calmed, and the nearby fragments moved back into their stately marches. The green and gold lights disappeared. The tendrils and filaments receded and vanished faster than the eye could see. Liam relaxed his shoulders and pushed back into the chair. He placed a hand on his chest to calm his heartbeat and slow his breathing. Uncertain if he was relieved. Readouts on the main panel streamed new information, including unfamiliar data, repeating the same set of information over and over. It wasn't a system glitch, it was too organized. The pulsing rhythm rose and fell, illuminating his face with the screen. It was like a wave, a code. Some message was imprinted now deep in the ship's systems, right where the metal and the mystery had met.